mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. These are all the classes of vertebrates that exist today. So let's explain each one, starting with fish. The very first fish appeared about 530 million years ago, but it was only about 100 million years after when fish started resembling their modern-day counterparts, since that's when the first Jaws appeared. Not the movie, the first literal Jaws. Most fish breathe through gills, swim with flippers, and come in all shapes and sizes. Fish are probably the most consistently successful group of vertebrates. Sure, they've had their low points like the famous Permian extinction, which wiped out 95% of all marine life that existed at the time. However, fish have always managed to bounce back, and they still dominate the oceans and freshwaters of today. There are more than 34,000 species living today. Now, fish can be separated into three main groups. Bony fish, which include what you typically think of when you think of fish, like salmon, tuna, and that goldfish in the local pet store. Bony fish are characterized by traits like having bones instead of cartilage, or covered gills, or mucus-covered scales. Cartilaginous fish are characterized by the opposite things, having cartilage instead of bones, and not having covered gills, their scales not being covered in mucus, yada yada yada. But an interesting fact is that many of these guys have electroreception, which is one of the most unique sensory abilities in nature. Sharks and rays both belong in this group. The last subgroup is a bit more unique. These are the ancient jawless fish, the first vertebrates to ever exist, and their physiology hasn't changed much since then. Many species in this group don't possess scales, they have primitive nervous systems, and many of them live in the mysterious deep ocean. Now moving on to amphibians, which first appeared about 370 million years ago, due to many fish's environments becoming more prone to droughts, which forced them to develop some traits that allowed them to survive on land, like legs and lungs. The golden age of amphibians was the Carboniferous period, which was probably the most humid and wet time in the planet's history. I just realized that sounds a bit weird. Anyways, this was the time when amphibians ruled the land with giant insects, which is pretty much the opposite of what we think about today. The only two animals that come to mind when you tell someone amphibian are frogs and maybe salamanders. They've fallen a long way from their glory days, although there are some frogs that are single-handedly destroying ecosystems, so who knows. Anyways, most amphibians rely extremely heavily on water. Most importantly, that's where they lay their eggs. Pretty much all amphibians go through a sort of metamorphosis, from a small, purely aquatic animal to a much larger animal that can thrive on land as well. Now let's move on to reptiles. One key difference between reptiles and amphibians are their eggs. Reptiles can lay their eggs on land, which have hard shells that protect them from the surrounding environment, while amphibians have to lay their soft, squishy eggs in the water. This is the first class that has truly ventured away from the water. These traits would lead them to world domination right after they first appeared during the late Carboniferous about 320 million years ago. The period that followed the Carboniferous, the Permian, was the perfect time for reptiles to rise up, and it was the period when amphibians saw their downfall. However, I have an entire video just about the Permian period, so I'm not going to get into that too much here. Just know that it was probably the craziest time in evolutionary history. Anyways, reptiles also have extremely resilient scales, and they can be classified into 4 different classes today. Testudines, which contains turtles and tortoises, is characterized of course by the iconic shells, but also by the fact that they have beaks instead of the traditional mouth. The next class, Squamata, is made up of snakes and lizards. This class has the most species out of all 4 reptilian subgroups, with about 11,000 species total today. Then there is Crocodilia. Now, can you guess what this group contains? That's right, iguanas. Nah, I'm just messing around. This group contains crocodiles, alligators, caiman, and everything in between. These are the armored, crushing biters of the reptilian family that have been unchanged for quite a few million years. And there's a much smaller group, Rhynchocephalia, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, which only includes 2 species today, both of which live in New Zealand. These are the tuataras. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly either. And these guys have been unchanged for about 200 million years. Reptiles are still incredibly successful today, having some animals that have stood the test of time and are still some of the most fearsome animals on the planet, with species like the saltwater crocodile and the green anaconda reaching weights above 1,000 kilograms. But of course, the golden age of reptiles was the time of the dinosaurs. But they deserve an entire video of their own. So if you want that, then smash like and subscribe. But as everyone knows, dinosaurs evolved into the next class of animals. Dinosaurs evolved an extremely efficient and useful respiratory system that allowed them to grow to extremely large sizes. But it also allowed their descendants to be able to fly, which is the key characteristic we think of when we think of birds. Now, of course, there are flightless birds like ostriches, emus, and penguins. Birds are extremely diverse and occupy pretty much every kind of niche all over the world. They were some of the first that could survive in extremely cold environments, unlike amphibians and reptiles, because they are cold-blooded, whereas birds are warm-blooded. But as I said, they can be found in every step of the food chain, from filter feeders to simple seed eaters like the very humble chicken, to apex predators like eagles and owls. Many birds are also extremely intelligent, with the smartest species of birds being able to compete with some mammalian primates, sometimes even being able to outsmart the very smartest primate in the world. Now, the other distinct characteristic of birds is their beak. Now, early birds like Archaeopteryx had a jaw and teeth, but this evolved into a beak because this was much lighter and supported the flight ability that they had unlocked, as Tirzu would say. There are all sorts of types of beaks. There are beaks for filter feeding, seed grabbing, flesh tearing, fishing, woodpecking, and they can also be used essentially as a hand. Now, don't get any dirty ideas. Anyways, moving on. Now, let's move on to our last class of vertebrates. Mammals are the most dominant class of animals living today. Primitive mammals appeared as far back as the Permian period, but the first true mammals came to be about 225 million years ago. Unfortunately, these early mammals would have to live in darkness for over 150 million years until the dinosaurs were wiped out by the famous meteor. And this is when mammals started to bloom into countless shapes and sizes we know today. Some decided to go back to the ocean, being just as dominant as fish, and some of them even casually decided to become the largest animals to ever exist. But of course, mammals really excel on land. There are some really unique mammals like marsupials, which have strange pouches where their baby grow. This group contains many of the mammals from Australia, but also there are a ton of marsupials in South America. Monotremes are even stranger, deciding to let go of the live births that mammals are famous for and instead laying eggs like all the other classes of animals. This group contains the platypus and echidna, for example, but of course, the group that contains the most mammals, and this group is also by far the most successful, the placental mammals. This group contains everything from rodents like rats and mice to the famous predators like lions, tigers, wolves, foxes, bears, and the prey they eat like ungulates, which include zebra, deer, elephants, giraffes, bison, and everything in between. Some of them took to the sky and used vibrations to detect their prey. These are bats. And then there are the primates, which includes ourselves, gorillas, chimpanzees, and, everything that is a bit of an asshole. Mammals are differentiated from other classes with two big traits: fur and milk production. Now, fur, it serves a couple of purposes: insulation, protection from the cold, protection from the sun, all that. But the more important one is milk production. Without this, placental mammals would probably have a much harder time surviving. But anyways, the 4 classes of vertebrates, I'm just gonna end the video right here. If you want a more in-depth video on all of these, then drop a like and subscribe. By the way, how are you guys liking Invincible Season 3 so far? I mean, I'm watching it. It's probably one of my favorite shows that's come out in recent years. Maybe I'll pose this question, or questions like this, at the end of every single one of my videos. Just a random question that we can discuss in the comments or somewhere. Or maybe I'll start a Discord once I, get to 4-digit subscriber counts, or 5-digit subscriber counts, but I'm not there yet. Anyways, thank you for watching, and have a great day.